Hey, hello. Have you ever wanted to use bad skills for whatever reason, even though we have a lot of accessible good ones in the 3 and 4 star pool, or even for free 5 stars that we occasionally get, or in the Grail pool, or you don't? Well, I kind of get that. But if you ever wanted to use something like Armored Blow for whatever reason, then this is the video for you, I think. I don't know. I thought this just be a fun topic, nothing particularly serious or guidey or whatever. Let's talk about skills that you never will use, but if you wanted to use them for some reason, you can use them. Starting with Snags. Snags aren't particularly old. They came around 2021 or 2022, but when they did drop, they kind of just flopped hard because you have to give up an entire action just to potentially debuff a singular foe within 4 spaces, which wasn't really that great when you consider the fact that you just had a lot of other accessible options that debuffed more foes and was at the start of a turn. It was way easier to do with a little to no setup comparatively to Snags, and that's why nobody used them. But if you did want to use them for some reason, you could potentially try and pair it up with somebody with a Vulture Tome or anyone with plug-in or Panic Smoke 4, although Panic Smoke 4 already debuffs the foe anyway once you set it up. Or if you wanted to use it with a Link skill, you could get a decent stat swing from it. For example, if you wanted to debuff a foe with a variant of Snag that debuffs speed, and then you have some sort of Link skill that also grants speed to the user, then the speed swing actually becomes pretty decent. Although I should probably say, if I didn't already say it, that you have better ways of doing this, but if you wanted to, you can. And then we got Defiance, and Defiance were probably the one giving me the biggest issue, mainly because it's easy enough to get visible buffs, and the condition for Defiant for what you get out of it is really mediocre at the end of the day. It's 7 visible of whatever the specific Defiant is, and it's easy enough nowadays to run something like Hone 4, which also grants +7 to whatever respective stat at the start of a turn if they are adjacent. But with a lot of tier 4 skills in general, they aren't exactly cheap. But if you have a Legendary Azura, you probably already have a tier 4 skill. Still, if you have her, and you have somebody with Defiant, you can even put in the Sacred Seal if you want to waste 150 coins. I did that. It was funny. Was it worth it? And then if you dance somebody with Legendary Azura, if they have the Defiant condition active, then they can get Spectrum 7 visibly. Next we have Bracing Blows and Armored Blows and the Warding Blows and all the really bad ones. I'll give some credit to Bracing Blow, although maybe that is a bit of my bias talking because I do use this set a lot. If you pair it up with somebody that could do a drag back or a lunge set with Emblem, and the idea is just to survive, then getting a bunch of extra bulk like that is going to be a bit better than probably running something that grants attack speed, since chances are if you're running a set like this, you're really just there to survive and being annoying. Although we do have access to Fortress Defense Risk 2 readily available in the Grail pool, so you may want to use that, or if you don't want to spend the Grails, I guess this is something you could use. But I also don't know how expensive Bracing Blow 2 is. Wait, actually they're both. And then we have Solid Ground 4, and I wouldn't say the skill is completely awful per se, but at the same time it doesn't have the same ubiquitous nature as something like Stillwater 4 because there aren't any supportive skills that scale off defense. Whereas with Stillwater you have Sabotages, you have Elamine, so on and so forth. I will say though that you could definitely do something with Solid Ground, but it will definitely pertain more to a Summoner Duels niche than anything else, and this will have to do with AoEs. AoEs scale off visible attack, so you definitely want to stack it up as much as possible, what with something like Stillwater, Life and Death, or Solid Ground, or even Fury if you want to do some Wings of Mercy stuff. Solid Ground actually makes this really interesting because it boosts your defense and attack and dumps your res, meaning that in the scenario where you have to take a hit from something more melee oriented, there's a good chance that you'll have a better chance of surviving with that than you would with something like Stillwater or Life and Death, because more often than not they're going to be targeting your defense stat. So you pair it up with something Valoria and you can have an instant Blazing Wind ready to go. Next we have Brazens, and Brazens in particular, I wouldn't say are completely awful, but it's incredibly dependent on having somebody like Winter Bernadetta or Spring Bernadetta around, just so you could activate Brazen much more easily, because until you're able to fall into that range, you're not getting any stats whatsoever, and that could easily make or break a lot of situations. So for stuff like that, you definitely want to run some sort of Vantage set, maybe somebody like Keaton, Altina, so on and so forth. There are a lot of Vantage sweepers that we have in the game, and while I would definitely recommend this route for setting it up, just so you could just have the stats ready to go, it's not something that you completely need if you're willing to gamble it, because because if you have some sort of damage reduction support or skills, whether that's Niffle support or flame support or quick riposte 4 or whatever, and you're able to fall into the range with the damage reduction, then you can set it up that way. But you're giving up a potentially high amount of bulk from it, which is why I do think it's way more dependent on somebody like Winter Bernadetta and Spring Bernadetta. And next I want to quickly touch upon Chill Speed 2. I think this skill is more underrated than it is niche or bad, although you could definitely argue it's niche because what I'm about to say would probably fall into that category, and this is really just going to boil down to it targets your god swords. And the reason I find this to be really important is that even if you were to run something like Chill Attack Speed, you may end up running into an ally that has some sort of life and death soak support, so by increasing their attack speed to great lengths, they're able to dodge stuff like Chill Attack Speed, but there aren't any conventional means of dodging something like Chill Speed Defense. This is something that chances are your god swords are going to be hit with. And then we have Pass, and Pass is a skill that lets you pass, hence the name. It can let you go through enemies and you can attack if there's an open spot. And really what it's going to boil down to is having good movement. Chances are you're not really going to have a good time using Pass on something like an infantry because they don't really have the best movement capabilities, although there are plenty of means of getting around it. I would say Cavs are definitely your best option for it, but that alone I don't think is going to be enough, especially if you were going to extend all your movement. You probably want a massive threat range, and because of that, I find somebody like Brave Crom to be a really good user of it, solely on the basis that he could easily get up to 7 movement if paired with the right allies. And again, this is incredibly niche, and chances are if you are going in this far anyway, you probably aren't thinking about your survivability, although there are means of doing that, maybe with something like Alarm Attack Speed, but for the most part, you're probably just getting in there to deal damage, and that's probably about it. So if you want something like that, you probably want to throw it on a really high movement cav, and Brave Crom is probably your best option when paired with Brave Celev. And for the last bits, I want to quickly talk about Attack Smoke 4, and I want to talk about breakers and triangle depths and all that stuff. I'll be quite frank, I don't think Attack Smoke 4 is good. I think anything and everything has some sort of guaranteed follow-up or a way of securing that guaranteed follow-up, which is why I don't think it's particularly great as a skill. But I do think if you were to pair Attack Smoke 4 with no follow-up, then you'll find significantly better results than just Attack Smoke 4, because even with a guaranteed follow-up, a speed check will absolutely shred them. Because chances are, if you're running Attack Smoke 4 on a unit, they're probably not the fastest anyway, and if they aren't the fastest, anything with a guaranteed follow-up will more than likely be able to double regardless. But with no follow-up in Attack Smoke 4, the only way they're going to be able to double through that is if they have no follow-up themselves. And a lot of units nowadays definitely have this, and all the fast ones don't really have to worry about it anyway. But for what it's worth, the ones that don't have that and they do rely on guaranteed follow-up stuff, it can work well enough. And if you wanted to go a bit further, you could also pair it up with Quick Riposte 4 or any sort of guaranteed follow-up of your own, because it also guarantees your guaranteed follow-up. And that's a lot of words, but it makes sense, trust me. And then you have breakers, and breakers are incredibly mediocre and niche, and I don't know why you'd want to use them, but if you did want to use them, you could use them. No follow-up is kind of already a thing, so you don't generally have to worry about it on faster units, but if you want to do something a bit of haha funny, you can. With something like Assassin Bow, which has Dagger Breaker in it. You grab another breaker, you put in your B slot, and you can break 2 things at once. It's great. But realistically, if you're going to be running some sort of breaker set, you probably want to do it with a Triangle Adept unit, just so they can act as an arena assault check if you ever really need to deal with those. Cecilia is definitely one of the better ones you could use because she has Triangle Adept innately in her weapon, and she has the Raven effect in her weapon, so she could check 2 colors at once. You could then continue to stack up as much attack as possible, maybe even bolster a bit of defense, so if you do need to go up against a heavier hitting colorless or blue unit, it's going to be a bit better, but results will vary. Although if you don't want to spend the dew on it, because I don't blame you, you could spend the dew on another weapon you probably don't want to spend it on. Or, kidding aside, you could use it on any other unit that may not necessarily have the best attack, or they have some attack, but if you wanted to find some purpose with them, you could turn them into a Triangle Adept color check, and it works fine enough that way. And of course, we have to bring up boosts and close ward. And you know what you could do with those? Thanks for watching.